If you're looking to get into 40k as a beginner, then what you're looking for is Combat Patrol. Combat Patrol allows you to take a single box for an army that contains everything you need to play a game in a simple and controlled game mode that will teach you the basics of 40k and gives you a starting off point that you can expand upon as you grow your collection and play larger and larger games, eventually getting to the point of playing a standard game of 2,000 points. Or at least that's the idea. Unfortunately, I can't in good confidence say that Combat Patrol has achieved the goal of being a good introduction for newcomers into the hobby. It certainly has some good ideas. I think removing the list building elements from the game is very smart because that's generally one of the more complicated parts of the game to understand. And it will allow you to get straight into a game without having to worry about building a decent list that isn't completely broken in a lower point game, and it reduces the options and intricacies of the detachment, which will help stop players being overwhelmed with choice. But I don't actually think it really does enough to help someone learn the game of 40k itself. I don't want to speak too much about the balance of Combat Patrol, as I don't think that's a particularly useful metric to measure how successful the game mode is. Historically, Combat Patrol was just the name of the starter box you could get, so they weren't ever really intended to be pitted against each other. And as codexes are released for 10th edition, you can see the changes that are being made to each Combat Patrol to help them fit more into the balance of the game mode by reducing the number of vehicles or heavy weapons in exchange for more even distribution of infantry or elite units. Sorry, guard players, another common Astra Militarum L for you. Enjoy your horses. I also don't think balance is that important compared to what the function of Combat Patrol should be, which is to help new players play the game. They should remove the 10 points for painting models. Don't force your new players to lose points for not painting their new minis they're excited to try out. I know it's part of the main game. Combat Patrol is essentially the exact same core rules with reduced army composition requirements. But I don't really expect Combat Patrol to be used by established players where the victory points for being painted might be more appropriate. Funnily enough, I think Games Workshop actually agrees with me because their own introduction for Combat Patrol says, and I quote, "There is no need to create an army list and add up points values. Simply choose your favorite faction, assemble your minis, and prepare for war." Assemble your minis. Doesn't say to paint them, although it then does give a full page to talking about Battle Ready, which is just taken from the core rules. I think this page is fine to introduce the concept of Battle Ready, but don't then make it part of the scoring during your quickest and simplest way to start collecting and playing Warhammer. We'll continue to talk more about some of the issues present in Combat Patrol throughout the video, but I'm not the kind of person who wants to just whine incessantly about something without providing at least some sort of plan or suggestions on how to fix it. Unless it's for content where just being a whiny arsehole is funny. But in all seriousness, I am someone who enjoys both finding problems and also trying to help to fix them. And I have some thoughts on the best ways to fix Combat Patrol, so please indulge me as I go through my list of suggestions. Okay. Number 1, play Spearhead. Continuing the tradition of Age of Sigmar making 40k players jealous in every single reveal event they've ever done, Spearhead is basically Combat Patrol, but better in every way. I do commend Combat Patrol for what it is doing, and do have to give it some props for giving new players a way in. And I think Combat Patrol was necessary because it walked so Spearhead could run. Through some rigorous and statistical analysis, it is much more likely that you, watching this video right now, have played or at least know something more about Combat Patrol than you do about Spearhead. So you're probably wondering what makes Spearhead so much better. The main thing is that Spearhead isn't just Age of Sigmar, but slightly less. Spearhead is a complete functioning game in its own right that not only acts as a primer for the rules and systems that were used in a full game of AOS, but also introduces some really fun ideas to keep things exciting and snappy. With Combat Patrol, you're not really changing much from a standard 40k game, which is both good and bad. It's good that when you do go up to play a bigger points game of 40k, you don't actually have to learn too much extra outside of the list building and a few extra stratagem options. But it's bad because it means you have a lot thrown at you immediately, including things like every single core stratagem, which is a lot of tactical options being thrown at you before you even know how to really interact with the game. That means that, honestly, at least one of the two players in Combat Patrol should at least be somewhat knowledgeable in the game of 40k to help the other person learn. Two completely new players are going to have to get really stuck in and work out what a lot of these options mean, on top of learning what is a relatively complex game. I suggest if you are two new players, you just ignore the default strats for the first couple of games. And even more weirdly is Combat Patrol sneaks in an extra rule about battle line units being able to secure objectives and make them sticky, which for those unfamiliar with the term basically means that you don't have to have units standing on the objective to count as holding it. But not every Combat Patrol has battle line units. The only thing really outside of list building that Combat Patrol removes is the secondary missions, opting for a fairly standard but slightly simple set of primary missions and each Combat Patrol getting access to a couple of secondaries. Look, like I said earlier, I really do not want to go down that rabbit hole of balance. You could spend a long time comparing each of the Combat Patrols, their secondary options, and you'll probably find some pretty drastic differences in how good those secondaries are. Or you'll find some pretty weird, nonsensical nonsensical stuff in the units that you get. Like, why does the Space Marine Combat Patrol give you 2 Terminator characters, of which only one will be in the unit and protected, the other will have no way to protect itself because there's no lone operative, despite the fact that this Combat Patrol was made from the Leviathan starter box for 10th edition, has a lone operative character right there. You can discuss it in the comments if you want and point out things that you've noticed, but I don't want to go through every single secondary for this video when realistically balance shouldn't be that important to Combat Patrol. Yes, the secondaries not being generic means that there is another lever that needs balancing when you're actually trying to balance the game on top of the units themselves. However, I also believe that the best way for Combat Patrol to work is having a more seasoned player going against someone new. And in that situation, I think the secondaries being more attuned to the nature of the army you're playing to give you a chance to explore their playstyle is a valid and reasonable idea. And yes, sometimes those secondaries are just free victory points for doing the main objective, and sometimes you have to do a maths equation to work out if you get a chance of getting some victory points. But for introducing someone to the game, they work fine. It falls apart a little in the new person versus new person scenario, where one player might be turned off the game if they see how unfair their opponent's win condition is, or in the seasoned player versus seasoned player scenario, but I don't think Combat Patrol is really fit for that combination. Also, as the person introducing your friend to the game, this isn't exactly the game combination, which means you actually need to try and win. You're here to introduce your friend to the game and teach them the rules. So it shouldn't really matter that much how balanced it is when you're just trying to teach them, how to roll the dice. Not physically, but you know what I mean. My very first game coming back in 9th edition was a 500-point game on a mission that was very, very heavily favored to my very fast Rukari versus Steve's slow Death Guard. I won that first game. I almost grabbed defeat from the jaws of victory, but I did win, and it introduced me to how to play the game, what kind of tactics I should be thinking of, and that maybe throwing squishy Rukari into a solid wall of stink isn't a good idea. That third one I still haven't actually learned. But something I have learned since starting the game is how to more effectively transport my minis to my games using a miniature case of Tabletop Stronger. That's right, it's sponsored time! They told me it couldn't be done. They said it would never work, but I've done it. Through the power of magnets. I've rebuilt him, improved him. The perfect advertising machine. Buy a Mag Case 2.0, buy one now, it has adjustable trays, get a Mag Case, look how strong they are, buy it now, MDF is strong, buy one, tabletopstronghold.com, buy it, final chance for Black Friday, buy a Mag Case to protect your minis and yourself, buy it, free shipping, buy a Mag Case from MDF Train, links in the description, buy it, Spearhead does away with a lot of rules by dividing the rules into the core rules and then the advanced rules. The advanced rules include all the commands, terrain rules, magic, army composition, command molds, and battle tactics. If we put those through our AOS to 40k translator to help most of you who are watching, this is essentially removing the core stratagems, core terrain, the list building. I don't really have an equivalent here, but it's the rules for unit champions, standard bearers, and musicians, and secondary missions. That's quite a lot to cut, but Spearhead does have some simplified terrain rules and introduces a new unique rules for reinforcements, which I'll come on to later, which helps to make the game feel more complete. You're probably thinking that is a hefty amount to take out, possibly even too much. How does magic even work? Is there just no terrain? How do you even score? Do you just have no tactical options? No! You see, the game designer did this brilliant thing called game design. Instead of it essentially being Age of Sigmar Light, Spearhead is its own game. Firstly, the game is cut down to 4 rounds instead of 5. You then roll off and the winner decides if they are attacker or defender. This is actually quite an interesting choice, because whilst the attacker gets to deploy first, they have to pick their regiment ability and enhancement first, and the defender gets to choose the board and deployment map, which is quite significant. The attacker, however, then chooses who gets the first turn. So whilst the defender gets a lot of choice, the attacker is in control of the start of the game. The board you play has 2 sides, Akshi or Giron. Gyron? I don't know, I'm not an Age of Sigmar. And you choose between 2 different deployments. Each side comes with a twist deck, a set of cards that are drawn each turn, which has a little something spicy to the proceedings. Akshi has a more aggressive deck, while that one is more of a defensive deck. You can see from this that introducing new decks to change up the game wouldn't be too hard. And in fact might be an interesting thing to make myself. Each map has 5 objectives, and the primary mission is very simple. Hold 1, 2, or more for 1 point each. We also get points from battle tactics. But wait, you say, wasn't that in the advanced rules that you mentioned were removed? And to that I say, don't you dare interrupt me ever again, you little piece of shit. In Spearhead, each player gets a deck of cards, and each battle round they draw 3. At the end of their turn, they score points for each objective on the card they achieved. And at the end of the battle round, a player can decide to discard any unused cards and draw new. These cards are the genius of Spearhead. The cards have your secondary objectives, but the same cards also have your commands. Instead of being given a big list of stratagems you can do, you instead have a choice between completing the objective for points or using the buff that it provides. Each side has the same deck, and it's only a small deck of 12 cards, so you can start to work out what the other player has left, which also adds some intricate strategy once you've played a few games, turning this game from something that just helps you learn Age of Sigmar to a quick-fire alternative when you don't want to deal with all the bells and whistles. Age of Sigmar also has the concept concept of the underdog, which gives the player who is currently behind some bonuses to keep them in the game. And for Spearhead, that comes up as part of the twist deck. The twists are somewhat significant buffs, and the underdog usually is the one that is in control of these, meaning that there are instances in close games where you might not want to score points if that means making your opponent the underdog whilst they also have the momentum. In my second game of Spearhead, being the underdog was quite paramount. Despite me losing by 1 point, I was actually in a decent position, and being able to secure that position through the twist deck helped me to win. In general, this concept of the underdog really does help keep things pretty close and interesting throughout the entire game. Some units in each Spearhead have this icon, which means that they are reinforcements. Once for battle, reinforcement units that are destroyed can come back, so technically this small-looking Stormcast Eternal Spearhead is actually this. Sometimes. You want to be working around these units. In my first game, I only got to reinforce my Prosecutor in round 3, and my Liberators only in round 4. So I lost out on a lot of power because my unit of 5 was locked in combat for so long, and I couldn't reinforce it to do anything. Conversely, in my second game, Steve overcommitted into my Prosecutors that I surged forward turn 1. They've died, but they had already served their purpose. I got to bring them back in a better position, and it put Steve out of position. Steve's reinforcements never died, but his non-reinforcements did, meaning I had the momentum. In that game, my Liberators never died either, but they didn't need to. So there's a lot of tactics just around that. Do you attempt to kill off a unit or try and keep it locked in combat, just barely hanging on so your opponent can't utilize them again? Do you try and charge forward with your own reinforcements to get them killed so they can bring them back later? Or do you just leave them at the back where they can do something but it is actually for the greater good? Spearhead is also fast, partially I think due to the way Age of Sigmar works. There are some turns in these games which last nearly seconds. If a lot of units are locked in combat, that kind of takes away the movement phase. Most things don't have a shooting phase, so you basically get straight into the fight phase if there's nothing else to charge. Being a game by itself also means that you can expand Spearheads to being beyond what you get in just that Spearhead starter box. You can more easily introduce new Spearheads based on different models without having to release different boxes for it, unlike with Combat Patrol. And whilst it is like Combat Patrol in that it introduces you to the game, it also has enough going for it that you could use it as an alternative game for when you just want something a bit smaller. I think for 40k, for example, if you wanted a smaller game, you could just play a smaller point size. Combat Patrol is the tutorial you play before playing properly, even if you aren't necessarily going to be playing with 2,000 points. Spearhead feels more like it's a quick play mode that helps you learn the game, but is also complete and interesting enough that it could be expanded upon, instead of just a vehicle to get people to buy a box of minis and give them a plastic crack addiction. I mean, that is what it is, but it's such a good and well thought out way of getting people addicted to plastic crack fantasy flavor, I don't really mind too much. I mean, it just feels so easy to be able to just pick up a Spearhead. You could get so many of them. It'd be so much fun to just try a different army out with a different Spearhead to play it in this really fun game. I haven't got a problem. Thank you very much for watching. I'd like to give a big shout out to all of my supporters over on Patreon, memes on YouTube, or on Twitch for helping to keep this channel going and supporting me. If you'd like to help support the channel, then please go ahead and look at the description for links to the Patreon or to become a member like all of these fine folk. Or just like and subscribe to all the YouTube stuff, that really does help out. So thank you very much for watching once again, and I will see you next time.